Lieutenant Governor Bauer, agriculture and tourism are the top two industries in the state, yet the resource agencies, PRT, DNR, forestry, and agriculture are less than 1% of the budget. Seems to be, and they seem to be cut the hardest. What gives?
Okay. Well, again, it's about addressing ideas. I think it's, I don't know that we need a microphone in here. I think it's wrong that we do across-the-board budget cuts. I think it's impractical. You and your own family wouldn't do across-the-board budget cuts. You wouldn't cut your travel budget as much as you would or you cut your travel budget more than you would your home expense budget. And when government, we just cut across the board. My agency of aging last year had a 23% cut. That's not fiduciarily responsible. You got to prioritize in government. This very group of folks was asked earlier in Charleston whether we would have funded the Conservation Land Bank last year. And most of the people on this panel said yes. Most of you would say we should have. But I would tell you that before I would kick somebody out of a nursing home bed, before I would let people out of prison early, before I would cut education, I would cut out funding the Conservation Land Bank. And I know that's not what you want to hear, but you better have a governor that tells you the truth. You better have a governor that's willing to pony up and say, being a governor is a CEO of a several billion-dollar company, and we're going to have to make tough choices. Yes, I'd like to incentivize it where private groups like yours encourage more people to put land in conservation easements. Yes, I'd like to see us do all we can to be more conservative when it comes to our great resources in this state. But again, it's all about doing things and prioritizing them. And so that's going to be a tough decision to make this year. But what I find too often is people that run for office, depending on the forum they're in, cater to that crowd. And so I think that it's a bigger picture than that. And I could do that because I know what unites this crowd. But we're going to have to really talk about how you fund it. And so I don't know how long I have on this answer. But as Andre Bauer is governor, we've got to look at alternative ways to govern. The fact that we pay $1 million a year for traffic control at USC and Carolina and Clemson football games, which could all be done by state constables for the price of $0, would save you $1 million right off the bat. The fact that we have rest areas on each side of the interstate instead of one in the middle would save us millions of dollars. And that's how you ought to govern.
Dwight Drake.
In this economy, in which we have unemployment at 12.6%, and consequent impact on the revenue of the state, unfortunately, agency budgets are going to be cut. And it does call for decision makers to make hard decisions. I think taking across-the-board cuts is the easy way out. It shouldn't be done. But I would tell you this, as much as I would like to tell you and any other group that I speak to, that I make your priorities my priorities, I have to tell you that as governor, I see the two priorities, jobs and education. And when, for the first time in my life, we have fewer teachers in the classroom this year than we had last year, I must tell you that agencies such as those that David enumerated are probably, not probably, they will be impacted in a greater fashion, because we can't ignore the fact that we have fewer teachers than we had last year, that we have a majority of our children in our public schools living below the poverty line, eating free and reduced lunches, and not say that that has to be our priority, along with the attraction and creation of jobs. One of the reasons over which we have control that our revenue picture is what it is we have had a total absence of leadership from any quarter for the last 8 years in job creation. Had we had more success in that, we would have unemployment as a consequence of the recession that we're in, but we would not have the highest unemployment in the South if we had a governor, as I intend to lead on jobs and education. Thank you.
Well, it's cloud.
Yeah, I think the issue, at least in my mind, is that in lean budget times, obviously there are going to be budget cuts. But what you don't want to see is disproportionate cuts to things like the Conservation Land Bank. From my standpoint, where I come from, I think that disproportionate cuts to the Conservation Land Bank over time will actually cost our state jobs. I think when you think about South Carolina, what are our two greatest assets? Our natural resources and our people. And if we aren't preserving, protecting, and enhancing those two things, then what are we doing? You know, the original mission of the Conservation Land Bank was to do that, to protect and promote the quality of life that we have here in South Carolina. And I don't think we should ever compromise that, regardless of lean budget times, because it's critical to the overall health and the overall success of our state.
Jim Rex.
Well, I spent Tuesday morning with a subcommittee of the Ways and Means Committee looking at the budget cuts to education that are looming ahead, and this is on top of $750 million already being taken out in the last 18 months. You know, unlike the other candidates here, I'm responsible for an agency that has taken nearly 30% budget cut and serves over 700,000 children. The grim reality of the situation we've allowed ourselves to get into because of the lack of leadership and because of the lack of true emphasis on reform in our legislature as well as in our executive office has given us a whole array of bad choices. There are no good choices left right now. It's cut this or cut that. You know, what will do the most damage, what will do the least damage. Well, for over 2 years, I and some others have been pushing for the need for comprehensive tax reform in South Carolina. We have been talking about this for 30 years. We're not talking about a tax increase, because you know how scary that is, that word to some people. But we're talking about having a system that actually works to raise revenue that's stable and predictable in a way that's fair. And every economist who's addressed this issue has said essentially the same thing, that we need a broad and low tax base that spreads the requirements, the obligations among all of our citizens in a fair way. Until we do that, we're going to be robbing Peter to pay Paul, and I think these candidates are correct. Conservation is going to be Paul, not Peter, because they're going to be talking about more essential, quote-unquote, immediate concerns, and unfortunately in politics, it's the immediate concern, not the long-term investment that needs to take place, like land conservation. So instead of fighting each other for this priority versus that, let's start to get proactive in South Carolina and address this broken system that is hurting all of us.
Thank you, David. I think it's a false statement to say that we cannot have a protection for our conservation efforts and create jobs and have a strong economy. In fact, I see them as linked together. It's why I believe the Conservation Land Bank is important. I believe that long-term, what we have to offer in this state is wonderful people, but also places that other folks want to travel to, want to visit. And not only that, as the question stated, I believe, David, agriculture, forestry, and tourism are our biggest industries. And if we don't protect those industries and protect what makes those industries successful, then we won't have that as a strong part of our economy. We've seen, I believe, around 40% cuts to our DNR budget. That means our wildlife officers can't protect our assets. And I look at these things as assets to grow the economy of South Carolina, as well as, I believe, in places that have intrinsic value. The Conservation Land Bank has seen tremendous cuts, and I see the same results coming from that. It doesn't mean we're not going to have cuts in these agencies. We are. We're going to have cuts because our economic picture in this state and right now in the country is not too good. But the question is, can we afford to cut an agency 40% where we don't have wildlife officers protecting our assets like they need to be? Can we afford not to fund the Conservation Land Bank in a reasonable way so that we can, when prices are good, purchase easements and purchase outright conservation for the future of this state? I think these are not just extras. I don't see these things as just bonuses. And I'm not just saying this to this group. I say this to all the groups I talk to because it's important.